And now I'd like to tell you a bit about our speaker tonight. Melissa Bernstein, along with her husband Doug, is the co-founder of the toy company, Melissa and Doug, which has created over 5,000 children's products and sold billions of dollars of toys since its inception. Raised by educators, Melissa and Doug started the business in their garage in 1988, and they've been on a mission ever since to provide open-ended, inventive, non-technology playthings for young children. Throughout Melissa's remarkable career, she kept secret her lifelong battle with severe depression and anxiety. She reveals her struggles in LifeLines, her first book, which she wrote to help others who are also suffering. Melissa's book heralds the launch of LifeLines.com, an online ecosystem she and Doug are underwriting to support those seeking support, guidance, and community on their mental health journeys. Melissa lives in Connecticut with Doug and their 6 children. I'm very pleased to welcome Melissa Bernstein.
Nancy, and thanks Framingham Public Library, and thanks to all of you who are spending an hour with us out of your night. I really, really appreciate that.
This is May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that means to you and what LifeLines is doing around that.
Sure. Wow. We have a big month planned on lifelines.com. And of course, I'm so happy that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. But in truth, I feel like every day these days has to be Mental Health Awareness Month because we are at such a tipping point in mental health right now with so many people in crisis that it's going to have to become a discussion every single day. So I'm glad we're doing it in May, but we're doing it every single day after May as well. And I think we're on this crusade to destigmatize mental health. I want to show that people who look like completely okay and have achieved success can suffer with a mental health affliction and still, build a company, still be successful, still have children, still find joy. But I also struggle with the full spectrum. I have highs, the highest of highs, and I have the lowest of lows. And that's what anyone who is afflicted with a mental health condition goes through.
Well, can you tell me how the book came to be? What made you want to write this book?
Sure. So, gosh, that book, the book Lifelines, I've given birth to a lot of products, but that product was the hardest one to give birth to, and it took 50 years to come out. And I joke because I had 6 C-sections, and like that one was a baby that did not want to come out and took that long. It was a big baby. But I think, in truth, I was writing that book probably since the day I was born because I was born with something fairly rare. In fact, so rare that it's not even listed in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. It's called existential depression. And it is what is simply called a crisis of meaning, so deep and dark that from my earliest recollection, I asked myself, why am I here? What is the meaning of life if we are ultimately all just going to die? And what am I meant to do in my brief time here? And unfortunately, unable to receive an answer to those questions left me in this state of feeling that everything was absolutely absurd and that my life was futile and I was just doing things for no real ultimate purpose. And I couldn't understand why everyone else seemed so darn happy when I was suffering so deeply. And it was this incongruity with life that I really was afflicted with. So basically, feeling so out of sorts, feeling like I didn't belong, feeling like no one would ever accept me for thinking these deep, dark thoughts and channeling this anguish into a lot of really dark creativity, dark verses and dark music. I decided that the only way I could really fit in was to deny and repress and disassociate from everything I felt and adopt a facade that would enable me to fit in with conventional society. And I think lots of us who are despairing really hide the truth of who we are to fit in. And I basically anchored to perfectionism and martyrdom. From a very early age, I became a pleaser and made my mission to serve others and make others happy. And I anchored to my performance and desire to get those gold stars and achieve my worth through perfection. And I think a lot of women tend to do that. And that basically sort of carried me through my life. I had many afflictions throughout, but I basically never admitted anything other than I was perfect. I never felt anything other than I feel great. I adopted this persona that I was a super person and never felt anything other than, I can do this. I'm going to buck up. I'm going to be strong. I'm going to get through it. And, went through my life really until sort of my middle age. And now I know why it's called a mid-age crisis, because I got to the point where I was in such denied pain. I was resisting that pain with every ounce of my being. And I was suffering and exhausted to such an extent from denying everything I felt and everything I was, that the cry of my own soul to be seen got so loud that finally I kind of cracked. My facade cracked in middle age. And I realized that I couldn't do it any longer. I was running this futile race and not getting any closer to finding meaning and filling my inner void. And I finally needed to admit I couldn't do it alone. I needed help and make that journey inward and accept myself in totality. Sorry, that was a mouthful, but that is a big question.
No, that was wonderful. And, from the outside, I read that you started, your life looks perfect. You started a business from scratch, used your creativity to design toys, and you made hundreds of millions of dollars doing it. You've been married for many years. You have, I read, 6 children, 2 dogs and a cat. A beautiful house. Did the fear of shattering this image others have of you make it harder for you to seek help?
That's a great question. And yes, I mean, in terms of having everything, I achieved it. And it wasn't a lie. Like, I have the most incredible partner who I met when I was 19, Doug, who, we were partners in business and partners in life. We got married. We have a great relationship. We had 6 children. I achieved every conventional definition of the American dream that you could attain, right? We, had this company, $500 million, 6 children, every material good and riches, every riches, rich I could want. I mean, I had everything. But the truth is, when you deny who you are and don't accept yourself as who you are, you still feel that inauthentic life that you're living. And ultimately, when I finally got the courage to break free, I didn't question it for a second. It was so overdue. And I knew I had tried to do what society wanted me to do for 50 years. And where did it lead me? Nowhere. So I was basically like, I'm coming out, honey. Like, I'm ripping off the mask. I am free and I'm not looking back. And I haven't. And I've never once questioned doing it because there was no choice. Like, I had to serve my soul, or I would have died feeling like I never truly lived.
Well, what made you want to support other people dealing with mental health challenges?
That's a great question. When you grow up, feeling that you'll never be accepted for who you are. And, I have what is called overexcitabilities. There are these characteristics that make my central nervous system heightened, and my awareness and sensitivity to life and life experience much more acute than other people. And I think you even might have seen it when we were preparing for this, like all my senses are so heightened that if there's a light, and I have a light that helps light me up, if it's shining in my eye a little too much, it gives me this this hyper arousal that feels really, really uncomfortable. And that's just one of the hypersensitivities. It's all my senses. It's heightened emotionally, it's heightened intellectually, it's heightened imaginationally. It's this psychomotor, which is the revving up of my central nervous system. It's basically like all my tuning knobs are turned up to the highest degree. And I think when you feel that way, you feel like you're from another planet and you'll never belong. And that feeling was so despairing and so isolating and so acute. I never wanted anyone to have to go through that again. So I'm doing this so that people like me, creative people, anyone who's ever felt alone and stigmatized and that they won't belong, doesn't have to feel that way anymore. They can see someone who suffered for so many years feeling that way and know that there's a community they can go to where they'll be accepted exactly as they are. Then the second thing is I wanted to show that we all have the capacity to channel our darkness into light and make meaning. So I suffered for about 2.5 decades with the most dire form of existential despair. It's called existential nihilism. And basically, the feeling is that there's no meaning to existence, and we as humans have no ability to make meaning in a meaningless existence. And that's utter darkness, because there's no hope when you're that low. And I think the fact that I came out of that to find light and to make meaning, and I'm no longer an existential nihilist. I'm an existentialist, which is a path you travel. And I now believe that, even if there is potentially no meaning to life, we as humans must still strive to embrace life and make meaning. And it's our choice and responsibility to do that. I now feel that I've seen the light, and that has been so profound that it's my responsibility, my obligation, my duty to show others who believe there's no hope and no light that they can find it too. And then the third reason I'm doing this is because I was engaged in what is called, in my words, the feudal race my whole life. And it's basically this incessant need to quell the drumbeat of my own mortality by racing incessantly to do and act and engage in motion to try never to be still, because being still, that voice in my head that told me it's meaningless, would get louder and louder. So many of us sort of look outside ourselves. And basically, I was searching out there for the answer that could only be found in here. And I was racing faster and faster and getting nowhere. That's why I call it the feudal race. And in fact, psychiatrists, I've heard call it manic distress, when it's a mania that gets you nowhere. And I finally realized that when I cracked in middle age, I realized that, it was futile when you race outside yourself for something that can only be found within. And it was only when I finally had the courage to admit I needed help and needed to make that journey inward and actually accept that I am a full spectrum of emotion, that I have these stigmatizing qualities that are actually my blurs, my blessing and my curse, that I truly was able to find fulfillment and freedom. And that path, that journey that I took, is now the centerpiece of our lifelines.com ecosystem. And it's entirely free, but we recreated it, I should say, so that anyone who wants to sort of discover themselves a little further and make that inward journey can take it for free. So I firmly believe that we have to get to the point where we're willing to look inward in order to find our salvation, our meaning, our purpose, and our light.
You were very creative as a child, and we've all benefited so wonderfully from your creativity with your business. Do you see, is there a link there, the creativity and sometimes mental health?
That's an amazing question. And there is a direct link because, they say true creativity sort of takes the big three. That prolific creativity where you're able to create from white space, meaning like conceive something that's never been imagined from nothing. It takes an extreme heightened intellectual sensitivity, an emotional sensitivity, and an imaginational sensitivity. And I think those of us who are creative, we have a heightened awareness to both the beauty and the pain of the world. And we feel things to such a degree, and we imagine the possibility of what can be. And we think, we're curious, and we connect dots. And for me, it always starts, anything I create always starts with the why. Because I don't see anything as it is. I see things as they should be. So I look at everything in my life critically and I say, why is that the case? Why is this way? Why can't it be that way? And that's always my pathway to innovation, because I can look at anything I'm doing or anything my kids are doing. And now with LifeLines, I'm making products for people like me. And it always starts with that, like, I don't get it. Why is it this way? And people are like, there she goes. And it's that ability to imagine, the potential of what can be. So yes, and I think, there's always been a connection. I mean, I've read every book on like creatives and what the derivation of their creativity is. And there's always been a link between melancholia and creativity as well. And I think I don't see it as much as only melancholia, because now that I have come out of my deep depression, I'm actually more creative than ever. But I do think feeling those dramatic highs and lows is definitely necessary to be able to create. And I think many, because the lows are so much darker than the highs, many of us who feel both extremes, we can get stuck in the lows. So I think that's why maybe for so many years, people have made this dramatic connection between, deep, dark despair and creativity. But I know when I'm in my darkest despair, I find it hardest to create because I'm kind of underwater. It's sort of when I'm able to harness the full spectrum of emotion that I'm really my most creative. And I now see.
What made you become a toy designer?
Yeah, I think Doug and we initially, we both pursued a very conventional path because society in those days told us and told everyone, it's not about your heart. It's not about your passion. It's about a career. And those were the days when, in college, you already decided what you were going to be. You got on that career track and you were going to ride that thing to the end of your career and just go up the ladder. And it was never about what's your passion, what's your talent, what's your gift. It's just you got into a career and you did it. And both of us started on that track for a very short time. And we were both, I like to say, sort of like flowers without water and sunlight. I would say Doug was very good at what he did and he enjoyed it, but he did know that it wasn't like the spark that was getting him out of bed each day. And I was utterly miserable. I wasn't good at what I was doing and I didn't like it. So it was the dual combination of being terrible and despising it. And that made me not want to get out of bed. I literally fell into a deep despair. And I think, even though we were young, we saw what it was like to lead a soulless life and get out of bed each day, not knowing where your meaning was coming from. And we both loved children. All of our parents are in education. We always wanted a big family. We had substitute taught during summers and in camps and anywhere we could help teach after school programs. So when we went away for that fateful weekend, trying to figure out what we were going to do together for the rest of our lives, we knew it had to be around children. We had to do something that involved igniting kids' imaginations in some way.
Well, you're talking about family and children. How has your immediate family reacted to, learning about your depression and anxiety, or, can you tell us more?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think, I think for anyone, when they sort of come out with it, with a dark secret, like you never quite know how it's going to go over. And like I said, I mean, I guess the one positive of waiting this long is that I didn't question it and there wasn't any going back. But I'd say, there's been good and positive and negative of it. The positive is that I'm a very different person than I was. I was really very robotic. I was emotionless, and I was pretty much about going through the motions, checking everybody's, box off, serving everybody, really emotionless, because I never knew how to serve myself. And I was really serving from a very empty well my whole life, and going through the motions. So once I took the journey and accepted that I was like the full spectrum, now I do show more how I'm feeling, which in one sense is good. It enables my children to see a real side of me, but is very different than the mother they were used to, who would just serve, everything, single whim they wanted and never say no. So I think now most of them like that. They want to see the real mom, but a couple of the younger ones were like, wait a second, you're not making me a meal at 11 p.m. Now I've had to, because I was a martyr. And I think a lot of women, it's a topic we talk about a lot, and a word I never understood, because I always thought I was so selfless. I thought I serve, that's what I'm supposed to do. It's my duty as a mother. And I never thought of it as being selfish. I thought I was the epitome of selfless, because like anything people wanted, I would just serve. And I thought I was being selfless, but actually it was my blind spot. And I was actually being selfish, because I realized that I really wanted appreciation for that servitude. And I thought it was kind of this idea that salvation would come in the act of servitude, and I would be one day anointed and hoisted on everyone's shoulders and like be made mother of the year for this selflessly serving for decades. And I came to realize that not only was I not being anointed, in fact, the more I served, it seemed like the more people wanted from me. And it was like I could never serve them enough, and I was being run into the ground. So I wasn't serving myself, because I was utterly exhausted, and I was becoming really, really bitter, because I expected something and I didn't get it. And I was angry, although I wasn't showing it. It was repressed anger. And then I wasn't serving my kids, because my need for validation was so great that I was denying them the opportunity to build the skills necessary to become independent. So they weren't growing. They weren't getting the grit necessary to become independent adults. And I was angry and bitter. So it was this profound realization that I had messed up, and I hadn't served myself, and I hadn't served them. So what I'm trying to do now is help all the younger moms who so quickly fall into that pattern. I see it again and again and again. It makes me smile, because I thought I was alone in that, but I see it in all the young moms. Like I'll even be on a Zoom with them, and their child will just make a peep and they'll run over to them, to serve them. And I'm like, oh, there they go. That was me, and you think you're doing what a mom should do. And like, but they're starting it really, really early on. So I vowed to help the next generation to not make the same mistake, and to learn self-care for all mothers, and for anyone who serves, doesn't even have to be a mother, anyone who is caring for someone else, that we must care for ourselves and fill our well. So we're not serving from an empty well, because that is not good, and that will lead to tremendous bitterness ultimately. Woo!
Wow.
Woo! Hallelujah.
Well, thank you for that. We do have a couple questions now from the audience. Does anyone else in your family have the same diagnosis?
That is a great question. It is genetic, a lot of these things, but I am very happy to say of my 6 children, no one has existential despair, because that is a deep one and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But I do have a couple kids who have anxiety, and that's a tough one. And in fact, some of the ones who do work on LifeLines with us, which I think has been really healing. So yes, we do have a couple with anxiety, but we also have a couple who don't have anxiety. It's really fascinating. When you have 6 children, it's like I have pretty much, that's why I love to share experiences with other people who have questions about kids, because I've pretty much been through almost everything in my 27 plus years of being a mother.
Great. And the second question is just about the same thing. If you were afraid you would pass this depression on to your children.
Yeah, I think I always had this need to both have a career and have children. And there was nothing I wanted more. And even though I knew, it's funny, I somehow knew that I didn't have the right temperament to be a mother, because being hypersensitive and my emotional hypersensitivity is not conducive to teenagers, because teenagers are so mean and cruel. And like, even thinking about it, I'm going to get emotional. When I went from my kids thinking I was like the stars, the sun, and the moon, to one day, like nothing changed in my mind. Like I was the exact same, to looking at me with that disgust and like, you're not funny. Like you say the same joke that yesterday they were like hysterical over, and they just give you that sneer. Oh, I was left in tears like at least a few times every day. And it doesn't take a lot, it's like a dagger going through my soul. So teenage years have not been good for me. And I've had to really, like, my practice has had to become so strong, because they're tough, they go through, and I've seen the other side now. Like I wish I had known there's another side 10 years ago. But it's brutal. I have to, for me, it was brutal. So that's honest.
Well, I understand. I've been through that myself.
Yeah. Some people skate through it. And that's why I don't, when people are about to enter in, they're like, uh-oh, I said, no, I've had both experiences. I've had, 0 issues, like blissful, great relationships, hugs every day. And I've had the opposite. So I'd say I've been to both extremes and back.
One more question, and then I want to ask you more about the book. But someone was wondering if you take medication or you go to therapy.
It's a great question, and I will answer it extremely honestly. So, first of all, I'm not against any form of any tools that anyone wants to use to feel better. Like I'm happy with anything people do, but so I guess I'll start with the therapy. Yes, so before the middle age, I would have never gone to therapy, because being perfect meant I could not go to therapy, because therapy in my mind and through the society I grew up in, therapy meant you were broken and you needed help. And like, I never asked for help. I'm the type of person, if I'm walking to a door and someone like runs up and opens the door for me, I'm like, I don't need your help. Like I'm this, which usually means I need your help. Like I could be carrying 20 things and they're all falling. I will not let someone open the door for me. And that was that, like, that yucky sense of like, I don't need anyone. But I now know that was one of my flawed perceptions, because I now know that the strongest thing, not the weakest thing, is admitting you need help. So I had to change that cognition and say, admitting you need help is actually a sign of tremendous strength. So my therapist has been my dearest friend on my journey. In fact, May 6th, I think that's this week. It's May 6th this week? Yeah. May 6th, she's actually coming for Mental Health Month. She's coming on our on lifelines.com twice once to tell her journey, and twice, and the second time we're going to talk about like my journey with her, which should be kind of, I don't know, interesting, I think. So I'm really proud that I go to therapy, and I still go. In fact, a few months ago, she was like, you really don't need to come. And I was like, I need to come. This is like part of my practice. And now she would say, you do need to come, because I'm constantly evolving and having new issues. So anyway, I go to therapy. And in terms of medication, I have never taken medication for two reasons. And I would say my tremendous research, my philosophical pathway to meaning has proven my theory true. From the time I was little, I suffered with this crisis of meaning and needing the answers to these deep existential questions. And I always somehow knew that medication would not give me the answers to those questions. And the medical community who's gone into this existential psychotherapy basically says that this condition is actually a philosophical condition, not a pathological condition. So most of them concur that for existential despair, really the pathway to get yourself sort of, I don't know if you'd say out of it, but get yourself equanimous with it is through philosophy, which has been what has saved me. And the second reason that I was very fearful of medication for me specifically is because creativity is truly my salvation. And if I wasn't able to engage in creating every single day, I absolutely would not be here. So I was terrified of doing anything that could even for one little iota change my ability to create. And it wasn't worth risking it for me. It's that dire for my sanity. So what I've had to do, because I do take medication, which is my practice. Like my medication isn't a pill. My medication is a deliberate and intentional and incessant practice every single day. And I call it my backpack of lifelines that I have to strap on every day. And I have to be so rigid about doing it, or I am at risk, even today, of falling into despair. And I've told this a little bit to our seekers on LifeLines. LifeLines, our new venture, actually made me go into a crisis, because about March 16th, I was on a TV show on CBS Sunday morning. And within 3 days, I received 10,000 letters that I had said publicly I would respond to each one individually. And never realizing I'd get 10,000. I thought usually I get like one or two, and I'm like thrilled. I'm like, woo, somebody wrote me. So it's a big deal. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get 50 maybe, and I can respond to them. Anyway, it really threw me into a dark hole, because I saw that I might not be able to respond to all these people who were so alone and reaching out to me and telling me their stories. And it threw me kind of into a depressed manic mode, where I was trying to respond to people like 20 hours of the 24-hour day, and feeling like I was digging myself deeper and deeper. So it's a long way of saying I had lost the practice. In this mode of 4 weeks of responding 20 hours a day to people who reached out to me, I forgot all about my practice. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't engaging in self-care. I wasn't using my tools that I do every day to talk myself off the ledge. I wasn't engaging in my passions and my play. And I was like going off the rails. And I went to my therapist and I was like, I'm hearing the voice in my head. I'm going down. This is not good. And she was like, Melissa, how many times am I going to tell you this practice is your medicine? Like, this isn't a joke. You don't just do it because you want to do it one day. She's like, if you don't do this every single day, you are not going to be here. And she said it like with tears in her eyes, like she was very upset for me and she was very worried. And I was like, wow, this is like what I'm preaching, but I I've been doing it, but I never saw how easily I could go off the rails if I stopped doing it. So it was a really amazing lesson that I'm now like really happy it happened, because it showed me how important this practice is. It's essential. And again, it's my medicine. So you could say I take medicine because I do my practice. So it's whatever your form of medicine is. It doesn't matter whether it's a pill or a practice or whatever you engage in.
Gail, if you would like to unmute yourself for a moment and ask your question, please go ahead.
Hi, Gail.
Hi. I would like to know how it was for you with having anxiety when you were knocking on the first doors back in the 80s. One of them was our store. And yes, Myers in New Jersey, and our family store. And what was that like for you having, you knew you created something wonderful, but then you had to go around and like prove it to other people.
Market yourself.
Yeah. My mom told me today she bought from you, one of your first customers. Yeah.
Yes.
So
oh my gosh, sales for someone like me was the most horrifyingly dark thing ever. And it was the hardest thing I ever had to do. And I wrote about it many times because, the fear of rejection was so strong in me. And I was so honest. And our first products, I knew they wouldn't sell well. They were the type of products that needed a lot of explanation. So I couldn't lie either. So I was the opposite of your salesperson that just tells you it's going to be great. I was like, it's not going to sell unless you do the work. So it was really hard. And I ended up, Doug and I both did sales. We both did pretty much everything, but he did other things also. I was our only salesperson for a dozen years. And I had to sell, and I had this quota every single day so we could afford to live. And I couldn't stop until I hit it. And some days I would literally sit there, because we did telesales, we did it in the phone. I would sit there, stare at the phone, and I would envision this empty store with nobody in it. The phone rings. The owner is so excited, there's a customer, runs over to pick up the phone, and it's me trying to sell them products. And that was the vision that went, through my head every single phone call. It was horrible. And sometimes I would just sit there paralyzed for 20 minutes until I was like, oh my God, I got to get out of my head. I got to sell, X amount today. So it became a practice that I had to get myself out of my head and do it. And I ultimately did it. I mean, we're here, the company's still here. And I grew to actually really appreciate it. And it did give me a very big dopamine rush when I sold. So it ended up actually ultimately lifting my vibrational frequency. And I would start each day kind of low. And by the end of the day, when you get that sale, it is like a rush. So it was kind of like a medication ultimately. And I became, sort of intoxicated by the process of convincing someone to do something that they really didn't want to do, through passion for how amazing the product was, which I really believed.
It's great. Why don't we go to Mary's question about describing your practice, and then I really would like to talk a little more about the book.
Okay. The practice, oh my gosh, so much fun. So the practice has grown, and I've really just honed it maybe in the last month. And it really involves 3 different areas for me. And by the way, how you fill in these areas is different for every single person, but I believe for everyone it includes these 3 areas. The first one is self-care. And it sounds kind of trite, self-care, but for any of you who've been where I have been, which is a martyr, I've never even been on the list of self-care. I was that person who believed taking a bath was the most self-indulgent thing you could ever do. And I would proudly say to people, I have never taken a bath. Because again, my battle cry was I don't need to take care of myself. I am not worthy of being taken care of. So self-care is the most important thing. And I even reframed what I mean by self-care, because what it technically is eating properly, exercise, and sleep. but those terms like almost made me, made me, I don't know what the word is, made me uneasy, because exercise I became addicted to, healthy eating I became addicted to, and sleep I don't like doing, because when you're a creative and you go into these like manic modes, sleeping is not good. And I'm one of those people that's like, why do you need sleep? Like, I can sleep for 3 hours a night and be just fine, which is not true. So I reframe those even for myself to body nourishment, body movement, and body rest, because they seem kinder. And like nourishment means it doesn't have to be healthy. Like, it can be something that I need to nourish my body. So if it's not on the good list, it's still really important. So I have to do those things deliberately every single day, because as someone who has had to control her environment because the thoughts in my head are so dark, I've had to control everything I can control. I tend to get obsessive with things if I don't do them just deliberately. And that means I can't exercise or move my body for more than an hour either, because if I start to do it more than that, I start to become addicted to it in a negative way. So for me, it's like limits. The middle section is tools and skills. And those are really like what most people think of as practice. So for me, they are things like going to therapy once a week, mantras. I say my verses a lot to myself to try to calm myself down. I engage in mindfulness, which isn't meditation. I have a really hard time meditating because I'm so in my head. Mindfulness means whatever I'm doing, I'm actually in the moment feeling myself doing it. So if I'm like putting on my chapstick, I'm actually, for that moment, I'm out of my head. I'm like feeling everything I'm doing as I'm using it. And it's amazing. Like when you just become mindful, it can be in anything you do. And if you can be mindful for a minute, you can be mindful for an hour. So it's a good practice. And then it's some of the tools that are on my journey. So 2 practices I have to do every single day, multiple times. One is allowing my feelings, because when I feel something that's kind of negative, I start to judge myself and I start to berate myself. And I have to learn to just allow everything. If I'm feeling jealous of someone, if I'm feeling bitter, angry, instead of like, Melissa, why are you doing that? You shouldn't feel that way, which is what we all tell ourselves. I have to say, you are allowed to feel everything you're feeling, and just accept and allow my feelings. And then the other thing I have to do is offer myself compassion like multiple times each day, because I tend to get very angry at myself and berate myself. And if I make a mistake, I'm like really mean to myself. And I have to accept that now that I've accepted myself and I'm human, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to mess things up. I'm going to have dark feelings, and I have to give myself compassion for that. So that's kind of in the tools, and everybody's tools are different. Some people do yoga, meditation, whatever you do. And then the last category that's so important and the most fun is my passions and my play. And as someone who has had a lifelong battle between her head and her heart, my goal every day is to get out of my head as much as I can and live in my heart. In fact, my mantra is step on out of the head, moving into the heart, free to channel all dread into jubilant art. And that is my creativity mantra, because I need to get out of here, channel it all, and let it out. So that is a deliberate practice though, because if I look at my emails and I realize I have 200 emails to respond to that day, I could get lost in that. The day could pass and I don't do anything that really brings me in my heart. And that's not a good thing. That means I'm not feeling joy. So those are the really fun things. And for me, gosh, it's a whole bunch of things. Every day I make a point for 1 hour a day to walk with Doug in nature. It's a must, and it's no matter what the weather. I live in Connecticut and we have many yucky days, but you're going to find me walking. I'm just going to be wearing another layer or some really big boots. But you'll find me, other than maybe, 5 days out of the year, I'm walking. It's music. Music is so important to me, whether it's playing an instrument or listening to music. It raises my vibrational frequency. I drink tea a few times a day, which is really grounding. I play with my furry friends. One is right here. We have 2 dogs and a cat, as you said. That's really important. I try to have meaningful conversations with people who get me and who I love. That brings me in my heart. So it could be any form of self-expression that truly time stops and you're in that blissful euphoria of sort of play. So for me, it's very deliberate. It's all 3 things that I have to do throughout the day. And if my day starts lower, if I'm having an especially low day, it means I'm going to have to pull out more lifelines from my backpack.
Well, that's a perfect segue because I hoped that you would talk a little more about the book. It's really interesting the way it's written in verse and the pictures from nature. In fact, I think I was talking with someone from your staff earlier who said some of those verses even are from when you were very young. So
Yep.
If you would talk about that a little. And then I do want to make sure we talk about the website too. It's such a interesting and to me, it looks like a very unique approach to helping people. So if you could just talk more about both of those.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, basically throughout my life, from the time I was maybe, 3, 4, 5 years old, I wrote these verses. And they were the way I made sense of the senseless. There was such chaos in my head, and the thoughts where I was having were so big and so difficult to come to terms with, that those verses were the way I kind of understood the most complex questions and fears, and they reflected everything I felt. Yet I hid them away from the world because I thought they were too dark, too despairing, and also too simple for anyone to ever think they were anything of merit or value. So when I decided I needed to come out and really, kind of say who I was, because I was hiding, those verses were the thing that I felt like needed to see light more than anything else. Because when I looked at it, I had nearly 3,500 verses that had been collecting dust in the shadows and had never seen light. And the truth was, those verses had saved me. They were really the reason I was here, because I would recite those verses over and over to myself to keep me alive, and not do something dire. And I felt like maybe, just maybe, if they had saved me, they could save someone else too. So I decided those verses were going to determine the volumes of the book. And when I looked at them, when I finally kind of unearthed them all from the dark crevices of my, childhood, like chess, I realized that, and I laid them all out, I realized that they fell almost exactly 300 verses each in 11 different categories. And it was fascinating to see it because when I looked at them, I thought they were all dark. Like my whole life, I believed that I only could channel darkness into darkness until I made the toys. But I really saw that like half the categories of my verses were actually like about nature and about liberation and about presence and about actually very light, bright things. And in reality, about five were dark and actually 6 were light. So it was actually the slight nudge was toward the light, which was like a whole other revelation. But anyway, I divided them out. Of course, I don't have 300 of each in the book, but I basically chose, a bunch of my favorites, and they determined the volumes of the book. And I coupled those with my journal writings and a little bit of embellishment that I added. And that really formed the book. And then I interspersed it with photos of nature. And nature is one of the volumes of the book. And nature, other than writing the verses themselves, nature is my most essential lifeline. And nature has taught me so many lessons that I need to learn, and I wouldn't be here without nature either. And nature like speaks to me truly, like in a Dr. Dolittle way. I've got a deep relationship with nature. So the book was really my bid to show the world and myself who I was. And my thought was, it wasn't meant to be a self-help book. It wasn't meant to say this is the way out, because I didn't even know my own way out. I wasn't going to ever purport to show someone else their way out. But I felt like if I could show my own vulnerability and tell my story, maybe it would give others hiding in the shadows the courage to share their stories as well and come out of the dark also. So that's what it is. And then LifeLines is Doug and my, I'm so fortunate that, Doug and I were partners from the beginning, and Melissa and Doug from 1988, we partnered together. And honestly, I would have never had the courage to start a company without him. He really was like, you can do this. I was like, I can't do this. He really, sort of pulled me along and gave me the courage to do that, stepping off society's treadmill. And I think, this one is so exciting that it's sort of my initiative with him, partnering with me. It's the same thing, but we're doing it together again, which is incredible. I mean, most people don't have the chance to do it once in their life, and we're doing it a second time. And that is a community that we're funding completely to really, as we said, show people that they're not alone, and that what they're experiencing is actually incredibly normal and common. And sharing these stigmatizing feelings is what will make the stigma go away and allow people to, figure out strategies based on the experiences of others to maybe help their path be a little smoother. So we engage in these incredible workshops, and we talk about feelings that no one talks about. We actually have an event tonight, right after this at 8:30, where one of our community members, we call it a seeker share or a seeker spotlight. She's telling her incredible story of darkness to light. So I think we try to allow, regular folks to share their stories and show that we're really not that unusual in these feelings that we experience. They're actually extremely common. We're just scared to show them to the world. Yep, our community is completely free, and we have a private Facebook group that our seekers seem to enjoy a lot. They share a lot of incredible content. That's my email. If anyone wants to email me, I do respond to all emails personally. And I don't know, is that the only slide? Are there other slides? And then for May, for Mental Health Awareness Month, we have a full docket of activities, some really cool things. We're every week of the month, we're talking about one letter of the journey. So the journey that I took that's on the site follows the letters of the word space, because space is what I always was seeking between my head and my heart. So this week is S for stop. Next week will be P for perceive. A is the next week, which is allow. C is comprehend, and E is embrace. And we will do activities every week that relate to that particular letter. So it'll give everyone a little sense of what it means to sort of go through that journey. And join us. It's very easy. It's just you basically give your email address and sign up for a Zoom. They're all on Zoom like this. So if you're doing this, you're able to join in. And most people, don't share. Similar to tonight, well, we could have 200 people in a workshop, and maybe 6 of them share. And people always email me, and they're like, I know I'm not sharing. I'm a secret seeker. I'm a silent seeker. I'm like, everybody's silent. Like, that's cool. We don't need people to share. It's perfect if you want to simply listen and learn. And we've had many who've listened and learned for, 5 weeks now, and we'll chime in and say, I've been listening for a month and I finally feel I'm ready to chime in. And that's beautiful too. So we're happy to have you. And it's really it's not our community, it's your community. So I think we really use the wisdom of our people to come up with new ideas for workshops, and we're crafting them kind of on the fly. It's very organic, and I think it's fun when your community is really helping you in a new initiative, and you're kind of crafting it together. It's fun. It's what entrepreneurship is all about. Thank you, everyone. And know that, this has been a really tough year. And I think even many folks who've never felt sort of isolated and despairing in their lives have felt it in this past year. And just know that whether it's COVID related or not, I promise you're not alone. Like, you are in a big group of people who feel the same way, and we're more than happy to have you, and you can share those feelings and know that others are going through it as well.